Hey everybody, it's Mr. Wagstaff. Cool stuff to talk about today. So today we're going to start talking about FDR's time in office and his New Deal. It's going to fundamentally change America in a variety of ways. Let's go ahead and get started. So yesterday we had talked about Franklin Delano Roosevelt being elected. The main thing was when he ran for president, he said, I'm going to do stuff. Because Hoover hadn't done stuff or anything to help with this Great Depression that America is in at this point. So, not surprisingly, FDR is going to win. What is a little surprising is how massively he wins. So, look at this. The red states there in 1928 are all the people who voted for Hoover. So, Hoover won big in 1928. 4 years later, all the blue states are who voted for FDR. Hoover got absolutely destroyed. And then the cartoon here on the left is Hoover coming in and setting down basically all the problems of America on the doorstep of Roosevelt, and it's Roosevelt's responsibility here. I want to point out here, as we talk about the New Deal today, at no point am I going to mention the fact that FDR is in a wheelchair, because it doesn't play any part in his administration the entire time. Even in like the cartoons here, you can tell where he's at in that door, the American public just completely ignores the fact that FDR, because he's lost use of his legs due to polio, is in a wheelchair. Which is symbolic of the fact that America desperately wants a strong leader and doesn't want to acknowledge any weakness in the leader at the time. So FDR, you'll never see him depicted at any point being in a wheelchair. Is just something that America collectively ignored. And I'll reference that a couple more times when we talk about World War II, on how people and how'd they not know Hitler was doing this? How'd they not know Mussolini was doing this? How'd they not know Stalin was doing this? Well, people can choose to ignore things to a certain extent. Anyway, so FDR, when he runs on this concept of a New Deal. Now, he's not talking about like a car, like you're like, let's wheel and deal, let's make a deal here. He's talking like it's a poker game, and everybody got handed a whole bunch of crappy cards, and nobody wants to play them, which is basically what's happening in the United States at the time of the Great Depression. So the New Deal is the idea that you fold, you turn in your cards, and everybody gets a new deal, a new set of cards. And basically, we're going to like restart the game here. All right. So when FDR is elected, people expect him to do stuff. FDR comes in and he's ready to do stuff. One of the first things that he does, and he gets a lot of credit for this in history, is he creates this thing called the Brain Trust. Basically, his cabinet is these geniuses or these experts in different aspects of society. What's really impressive about this is a lot of these guys aren't necessarily Republicans, Democrats. He doesn't care what their political affiliation is. He actually has the first female cabinet member, and we'll talk about that here in a little bit as well, kind of separately of the different firsts that he has. He doesn't really care who you are, what you believe. If you're the best person to help him fix a certain part of the country, you're in his brain trust. So he is a very progressive president as a Democrat. Because keep in mind, Democrats are typically the South, the extremely conservative groups in the United States at the time. So when they elected a Democrat, for him to be very progressive is going to throw a big monkey wrench in the way politics work in the United States. On top of his brain trust, and you can't, as important as they are, this woman is wildly important here, and it is important to kind of start today acknowledging her, because we're going to talk about FDR all the time, and that's FDR there on the left. Sitting next to him is his wife, Eleanor Roosevelt. Eleanor Roosevelt is a pivotal player in this administration. She's a big reason why there's women in his cabinet. She is a lot of the brains behind his operation, or at least his compass on how he wants to move forward, and his brain trust helps him put it together. They are absolutely a team. FDR is kind of charming and charismatic and can be a person, but he'll get the ADD and be like, oh, butterfly. Eleanor Roosevelt is an absolutely fantastic partner for him to keep him on track to get done what he wants to have done. So much so, kind of the spoiler here, FDR is going to be elected 4 consecutive times. Only president we've ever had that is elected 4 consecutive times. But the first 2 terms are all the Great Depression we're going to talk about today. And in the next unit, when we talk about World War II, he didn't want to leave right when it looked like World War II America might be pulled into it. So he stayed. He's actually going to die of natural causes during his 4th term in office because he had gotten polio again. He was so sick campaigning for his 4th term in office, he couldn't travel the country. So Eleanor Roosevelt traveled the country in his place, and she was treated with the same reverence as if she was the president. So not only is FDR reliant on Eleanor Roosevelt, the public is aware of how important she is behind the scenes. So they make a very good team, and it is important to point that out when I'm like, FDR did this, FDR did this, FDR did this. I'm really referencing, especially with the policies that we're going to talk about today, this is FDR and Eleanor together did this. So he has all these people in place, all this great, but how does he get his message out? FDR is going to do something that no other president had ever done before, and it's only until recently, I would say, that any president has had the same success in reaching the public that FDR does. So FDR, at the end of the day, he wheels himself up to his table at his chair in the White House somewhere, and he has a little studio set up. And while he's painting here, he's all formal in a shirt and tie. He may have been. That's just what he wore at the end of the day. He has these things called Fireside Chats that are broadcast to the entire country where everybody listens to FDR and what he has to say. And you can see here in the top right corner, just people around the radio. Everybody would gather around these radios to listen to FDR. They're called Fireside Chats because the listeners are typically next to a fireplace in their house if they still have one in the Great Depression, listening to it. These are very candid. He is very straightforward. He's like, here's what's happened today. I had a turkey sandwich for lunch. Like, it's not a verbose political speech. It's just talking directly to the people and making a connection with the people. This really endears the population to FDR because he's just talking to you as a person. He's also very hopeful. He's also bringing positive. He's like, hey, we might have had a setback today, but here's why it's going to be better tomorrow. The Fireside Chats is this direct connection FDR has to the population that really, presidents have always, after FDR, tried to have something similar, and they haven't had the connection. I would say in recent history, Donald Trump is probably the closest to FDR as far as having that direct connection with Twitter, the way FDR had it with the Fireside Chats. But FDR absolutely has this connection with the people. People believe in him. They trust him. They feel like he's one of him. He has complete and total support of the American people because they can hear him and they feel like he is an intricate part of their lives with having these Fireside Chats, because you didn't hear presidents talk all the time like you do here at the Fireside Chats. So the question here is, explain how the Fireside Chats helped FDR connect to the public in a way that no president had ever been able to do before, and how it helped him gain support from the American people. So basically explain to me what the importance of the Fireside Chats are. Pause me, answer that completely, and we're moving on. All right, so FDR comes in and he says, brace yourselves, here it comes. And he's like, for 100 days, I'm going to pass you policy after policy after policy after policy after policy, and it's going to be called the New Deal policies because it's his New Deal. And he says he's going to do it for the first 100 days. And then he's not going to pass any more laws. He's going to make sure that they work. It ends up being so successful in his first term that he gets reelected in 1936, and then he has his second 100 days where he does the same thing again. He passes more laws and more acts to try to get America back on their feet. So we're going to go through here and kind of talk about them because there's tons. It's referred to as alphabet soup a lot because everything has an abbreviation. It seems overwhelming, and it was just the fact that the whole country had to be like built up from the ground up, like overnight almost. So there's a whole bunch of stuff here, and they're just fantastic ideas. You can tell the brain trust did their homework here when they're putting it together. So all of these policies, I'm getting ready to go through them and kind of give you a quick rundown of what they did. This cartoon does it well, that this is Congress basically just being like, help Uncle Sam, which is America. And FDR comes in his medical bag is New Deal remedies, and he says, I got something for you. And you see all those medicine bottles there? Those all abbreviations are all of these acts that get passed that are referred to as alphabet soup. So let me talk you through, and these are the highlights. This is nowhere close to all of them. This is the highlights of some of these policies that get passed in the New Deal. The Agricultural Adjustment Act. So farmers, they had overproduced on their land, and now it's the Dust Bowl, and the crops are dying. So we had enough food at the time, but if this keeps happening, people are going to abandon the Homestead Act concept, and we're not going to have enough food. So the government needs to go in and fix this. So the way they do it, and this lasts up to present day in some form, is the government goes to the farmers in the middle of the country and say, hey, I see you're growing 50 acres of corn. And they're like, yes, because I have to grow all 50 acres, otherwise I won't make any money. And the government's like, yeah, so here's what I want you to do. I want you to grow 20 acres of beets instead. And they're like, beets? I'm not going to make any money off of that. Oh my gosh. And the government's like, but I'll tell you what I'll do. If you'll grow 20 acres of beets, like we're asking you to, instead of all 50 acres, and you leave 30 acres where you don't grow it, we, the government, will pay you as if you grew 50 acres of beets. So you literally have to do less work and get the same amount of pay. And by doing this, and it's completely optional for farmers to do this, to buy into the Agricultural Adjustment Act, where the government basically pays you if you grow what they want you to grow. The reason this is beneficial is now that the government has oversight. They can basically help regulate crop rotation, keep people from killing their soil. If you're like, no, America freedom, I'm growing my corn. You can, but you just don't get the benefits of the AAA. By doing this, we don't have any more food problems in America. We might have eaten too much food problem today, but as far as running out of food after the AAA comes out, there's no more issues, and that comes out in the Great Depression. The next thing he's going to create is the CCC, the Civilian Conservation Corps. All these homeless people all over the country, what are they going to do? Their only goal is to get some money to send back home. So FDR's like, all right, here's what we're going to do. One of the reasons the Dust Bowl happened is we cut down all those trees out there. We need to plant a bunch of trees, like millions of trees. A lot of workers for that. So what he does is these homeless people that don't have a job, they can come join the CCC, and the government will provide them with 3 meals a day. They get to probably camp out. If they're near a government building where they could sleep in it, they could, but they're kind of going out in the middle of nowhere to plant trees. But you basically get to camp out all the time, and plant trees is a lot of hard labor, and you get paid for this. But since you're getting 3 meals a day, and you're getting they're providing you tents and all this other stuff, there's no food you need to survive or any money you need to survive. Any money you made from the CCC gets shipped back to your family, because these men had left their families in order to go make money. So now men are able to provide for their families, planting trees all over the country. So this is, and men can get back into the mentality that they're providing for their family. Women are receiving money from their husband, and they can start taking care of their households. The CCC was trying to put society back together at the time, and not because Herbert Hoover didn't want to give out money. He thought it would ruin people's incentive to work. That is still the mentality here. There is no just give money away situation. This is all you have to work for. The government's not afraid of spending money, but they want to see that you work for it. So, because that was still a concern at the time, that if you just gave people money, that they would ruin their desire to work. And the National Youth Association. All these crazy wild boys running around the country. There are boys, girls, regardless jobs. If you're between the ages of 16 and 25, you're probably too old to go back to school because you've been living the wild life. But you don't have any skill sets because you've skipped school for the last few years in order to get back into the workforce. So the National Youth Administration basically helped teenagers and very young adults the skill sets they need to enter the workforce and get them off the streets. The Social Security Act. While we're fixing everything else, this is a big one. This is when everybody's issued a Social Security number when you're born. basically, it's almost like a retirement plan. At 65 years old, the government will pay you so that you don't have to work till you're 92 years old, in theory. And the amount of money that you get each month is based on how much money you have contributed in taxes throughout throughout your life. So the Social Security, the whole concept of having a Social Security number, comes out here, so you're part of the Social Security Act. The Works Progress Administration, the WPA, what this does, very similar to the CCC, all right, but those guys are out in the middle of nowhere planting trees. The Works Progress Administration was more like in towns where men are, started that they need jobs. So the government's like, all right, I'll tell you what we'll do. You show up at this at town hall in the morning, we're gonna go out and dig ditches all day. All right, and we'll put drainage, like any public works stuff that you need. These homeless men, these hobos, they can go out here and they can do this, and they get a little bit of money that they can take home to their families. It's always just a tiny bit of money, but it is something enough to survive on. If there was literally no work to be done, they'd already dug all the ditches and done all this other stuff, they would literally have the guys go out, and women as well in the WPA were also allowed in different jobs. That they would have the men go out in the middle of the field, dig a huge hole, and then the next day they go back out and fill the hole back in, just to have them working so the government can justify giving them money. So now that people have enough food to eat, let's talk about how we can try to prevent this junk from ever happening again. The government creates this thing called the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, the FDIC. So what happened is people put their monies in the banks, and the banks got stupid with it, with buying on margin, put it in the stock market, and they lost everybody's money, and that money's just gone. The FDIC comes out, which is still around today, that says the government insures your money that you put in a bank. So if the bank loses all your money, the government will give you that money back. You can't lose your money. They need people to have faith in the banks again so that they will invest their money so the banks can give out loans and get our society up and running again. Now, banks, in order to have this fantastic insurance policy, they have to follow a lot of the rules that the government has set up for them. If banks don't want to follow the rules, they don't get insured, and nobody's going to bank with a bank that is not FDIC regulated. The Security and Exchange Committee. The reason everybody lost everything in the stock market in large part is because the people that owned the business owners in the stock market were lying about how good their businesses were. The Security and Exchange Committee, if you try to lie or do anything shady in the stock market, you're going to prison. Like, they do not play around in the stock market. If you're trying to manipulate and you do something illegal, and there's a ton of laws associated with the stock market. If you try to do shady stuff, they will arrest you because they want to make sure there's no fraud, because people, not surprisingly, are hesitant to invest back in the stock market after everything had just blown up on them. So the Security and Exchange Committee is still around today. These guys do not play around in the stock market. They make sure everything is on the up and up. And then there were still, with all these policies, there were still things that FDR just couldn't reach. Like, there's really poor areas, and a lot of them were in Tennessee. And so he creates the Tennessee Valley Authority. This is in his second term, and he's like, wait a minute. The Hoover Dam, originally named the Boulder Dam, brought that entire region out of the Great Depression. What if we just build dams in the poorest areas that none of our other programs are reaching? So that's what FDR does. It's called the TVA, the Tennessee Valley Authority. They build these hydroelectric dams. So not only does it give everybody jobs and obviously to build things like Norris Dam here in Tennessee, a lot of jobs, people are getting money, puts it back in circulation. After this, it stops places from flooding because dams can control water flow, which increases property values. Then the entire region in the middle of nowhere now has electricity, something that is new to these regions that get these dams. So the TVA kind of comes out at the end to pinpoint really poor areas that hadn't been impacted by previous New Deal policies. So the question here is, pick one or two of those programs, of the alphabet soup programs from the New Deal, and explain how they specifically helped get America back on track during the Great Depression. So any of the ones that we talked about, pick one or two of them and talk about them. Pause me, answer that completely. We're moving on. Now, not surprisingly, not everybody likes the New Deal because humans aren't always going to agree on everything. This is kind of like one of the things in history. Not everybody liked it. The vast majority of people were cool with it. The issue becomes, all right, is the fact that, and let me get here to my picture here. The main argument against the New Deal, even though it was helping everybody, we're spending a bunch of money on this. Where are we getting that money from? The future. We're going into debt for it, all right? So FDR is spending a bunch of money that we don't have, going into debt. This is something that Hoover and previous presidents really didn't want to do. They had done it, but didn't want to do it. FDR just goes all in and going into debt. This is called deficit spending more money than you have. When confronted with this, like, why are you doing so much deficit spending, FDR? FDR says, guys, I'm just priming the pump. What that means, all right, and at the time it makes sense, like, oh, he's priming the pump, okay, it's like a pump on a farm that has a big handle. They have to pump it out, and it's a big straw, basically. It goes way down into the ground, into underwater well or water reservoir. And you have to pump it all, like not all day, but you have to pump for a couple minutes. And it feels like nothing's happening because you're not getting any water out when you start it in the morning, you're pumping all day. And then finally, water starts coming out, all right? Because what you had been doing is priming the pump, is basically pulling the water up through the straw. So priming the pump is doing all of that work initially and not getting anything out of it. So he's like, we have to spend some money to make money. Basically, you have to do a bunch of work now to get the water later. He's like, we're going to pay this back. Once we get money, I want to put money into the economy, stimulate the economy, and then we're going to get money back from that eventually, and then we'll pay down the deficit. So FDR knew he was spending this money and just planned to do it. So, people were upset about the New Deal. You want to see how upset everybody is over the New Deal? This is the election of 1936. FDR won 523 electoral votes to 8. He won all but 2 states. He's popular. So there's not a ton of people that are furious at FDR for doing this because we are still in the Great Depression 4 years in, but it is slowly getting better. One of the more important aspects of FDR, because I'm talking about FDR like, oh, look, he's a godsend, he can do no wrong. It's not true. He's a human. He can make mistakes and has human fallibilities like anybody else. He's not a special human. So he does something that is really his only real power grab, aggressive power grab during his time in office. So House of Representatives and the Senate, they're all Democrats. They love FDR. The people love FDR. FDR loves FDR. Eleanor Roosevelt probably loves her husband. Everybody likes FDR. But sometimes he'll pass an act and the Supreme Court will reject it. Because the Supreme Court is there for life. So that Supreme Court had been there long before FDR got there, and they had been appointed by the other political party, Republicans, who may not agree with what FDR is doing. So he starts getting frustrated at the Supreme Court because they're the only ones challenging him. So FDR goes to Congress and asks Congress to allow him to, it's called his court packing plan, to add 6 additional justices to the Supreme Court to go from 9 to 15, and all those justices would like him because he would be the one appointing them. That way he can do whatever he wants and the Supreme Court can't stop him. This is a clear power grab. Now Congress, they just rubber stamp anything he comes in. FDR wants to do it. Absolutely, absolutely. This one, they're like, you want to do what now? Let's go talk about it. Unconstitutional. Can't do it. Or complete power grab. No. And Congress says no to FDR. His own political party elects him that says, that's too much, man. Like, if the Supreme Court says no, maybe they have a point. Like, that's the whole point of the Supreme Court. FDR is like, oh, come on, whatever, fine. So it falls apart. And FDR isn't able to add 6 additional Supreme Court justices. Pure coincidence, a lot of them were older and a lot of them were retired, and in his second term in office, he's actually able to appoint 6, and he doesn't have a problem with the Supreme Court anymore. But it's really important to point this out because what happens here is FDR, with all the support by the American people, he asked for more power, and the government said no. Now, a lot of times they had said yes, but here they say no, and he accepted it. See, there's other people coming to power around the world, like Stalin, Mussolini, Adolf Hitler. They don't take no for an answer. Nobody stood up to them. In America, not only did our government stand up to somebody wanting more power, they understood when they were told no that it goes back to normal, which is a very indicative that the United States government is strong and works effectively even when it's not popular. So the question here is, what is significant about the fact that Congress said no to FDR when it came to his court packing plan, and why is it such a good sign for our lasting system of government? So pause me, answer that completely. We're moving on. All right, so greater equality at the time. Frances Perkins, Secretary of Labor. She's on the left here. First female cabinet member ever. It's fantastic. And Eleanor Roosevelt clearly played a role in that. The first black Supreme Court justice, the first black cabinet member is a woman as well, and this is her, Mary McLeod Bethune. And so because you're the first black person on a cabinet, it's therefore referred to as the black cabinet because that's what America does. So he has women, he has African Americans. He also creates an entire group, the head of Indian Affairs, John Collier here in the middle, to actually try to work through some of the relationship issues that we have had with Native Americans over time. This is very influential in American history because the first time we try to do nice things for Indians, you know why we care? Because it's 1927 before Native Americans get the right to vote and become citizens of the United States. Because just like we saw at the 19th Amendment, as soon as a group gets the right to vote, people care about them. And this is what happens during FDR's time in office. So the massive minority support for FDR is something called the New Deal Coalition. Basically, if white males don't vote for FDR in America, he would still win. Between African Americans, women, Native Americans, he has the support of all types of groups, and he's going to win huge, even if white males didn't vote for him. Most white males do vote for him, as you saw in 1936. He won huge. What's interesting here is, as a Democrat, Democrats were the ones that supported slavery in the 1800s, all right? So it was a very conservative base. So if you see here on this map here on the left, the election of 1896, all right? This is the one that McKinley ends up winning. You can see the Democrats are all in the south and the middle of the country, all right? That's the conservative group. The liberals were the Republicans, and they're in the northeast. Now, look at this map of the election of 2000. This is the one with Al Gore and George W. Bush. But see how the colors are completely opposite? That the South and the West, they're all Republicans now, and the Northeast is all Democrats, predominantly. So what happened? Did those people change their perception? No. Conservatives are still in the South, liberals are still in the North. They just changed team names. Republicans and Democrats basically switched names over the 1900s, and it really starts with FDR's time in office because he started supporting minorities in these other groups that Democrats typically had not supported, and they start changing their focus at the time. And Republicans and Democrats changed their platforms and what they stand for, really starting during FDR's time in the New Deal. So the question here is, what had FDR done while in office to cause the two main American political parties, Republicans and Democrats, to start switching platforms? So pause me, answer that completely. We're moving on. All right, so you can't finish up this unit without talking about the culture and the New Deal. This is a lot of cool stuff here. So movies were super popular during this time period. Popcorn had come out and everybody was eating popcorn. it just kind of one of the things that stick with movies. Just a quinky-dink at the time. The biggest movie at the time was Gone with the Wind, and people really used movies as an escape during the Great Depression, and movies and the whole movie industry really takes off after this. One of the craziest things that happens during the Great Depression is people listen to radio programs all the time, and there's this guy, Orson Welles, who does a radio program of the War of the Worlds on Halloween, and it's a fantastic radio program. People apparently are kind of dumb, and they thought that America was actually getting invaded by Martians, and there was like this countrywide panic that took place. There were even rumors that people were like eating poison pills to die rather than have their brains sucked out by Martians. And it was completely not intended to trick everybody, but people really freaked out when the War of the Worlds got put on the radio for the first time. There's a very famous painter at the time named Grant Wood, painted this very famous painting that you may have seen before, basically supposed to show the plainness of America at the time. And then probably the most famous book to come out at the time is The Grapes of Wrath, written by John Steinbeck, which talks about the Okies' travels from Oklahoma out to California during the Dust Bowl and the Great Depression. All right, so the question is, explain what happened in America the first time War of the Worlds was played on the radio. All right, that's the end of the unit. See you guys next time.